Elijah McClain was a 23-year-old massage therapist. He was black, and he lived in Aurora, Colorado until one night on August 2019 when he was apprehended and killed by Aurora police. We have an article here from The Guardian that gives us a bit of perspective as to what happened. It reads, Elijah McClain death, Colorado police had no legal basis to restrain man, report finds. Police officers in Aurora, Colorado did not have a legal basis to stop, frisk, and use a chokehold on Elijah McClain, a 23-year-old black man who died after being restrained by officers and paramedics in the Denver suburb in August 2019, an independent investigation found. According to a report published on Monday, body-worn camera audio, limited video, and interviews with the officers tell two contrasting stories. The officers' statements on the scene and in subsequent recorded interviews suggest a violent and relentless struggle. The report added, the limited video and the audio from the body-worn cameras reveal Mr. McClain surrounded by officers, all larger than he, crying out in pain, apologizing, explaining himself, and pleading with officers. Police said he refused to stop and fought back when confronted. Body video showed McClain telling the officers, let go of me, I am an introvert, please respect the boundaries that I am speaking, end quote. But one officer attempted to put him in a specialized hold, pressing against his carotid artery and cutting off blood to the brain, a practice since banned in several places. He was held down for 15 minutes, then given 500 milligrams of ketamine, a sedative. He later suffered cardiac arrest and was declared brain dead on 27th of August. He died 3 days later. The report released on Monday found that paramedics failed to properly examine McClain before injecting him with a dose on a grossly inaccurate estimation of his weight. Body cameras showed Officer Nathan Woodyard making first contact with McClain, telling him, I have a right to stop you because you are being suspicious. Video showed Woodyard grabbing McClain within 10 seconds of exiting his patrol car. In a presentation of the report, Jonathan Smith, the executive director of the Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Urban Affairs, who led the investigation, said under case law, officers must have reasonable objective grounds to justify an investigatory stop. The reasoning that he was acting suspicious by wearing a mask and waving his arms, and that he was in an area with a high crime rate did not hold water. First, in that it was not an area of high crime, but also in that wearing a mask is not enough to be linked to criminal activity. So, I just want to take a second to say that Elijah McClain's death was tragic, and it should have never happened. Rest in peace, man. Rest in peace. You know, the police should have never ever stopped Elijah McClain. You know, before I go on, I want to just say up front that I'm not posing as a legal expert, but here's what I know about this, and I know that the police were wrong. In general, when police want to stop somebody, they have to have what's called reasonable suspicion that somebody is committing or has committed a crime. Police can't just stop you because they have a hunch. I'm pretty sure that's illegal. Here, they stopped Elijah because he had a ski mask on in public and because he was coming home from a convenience store and was apparently waving his arms around. Since when is wearing a ski mask in public and waving your arms around a crime? It definitely doesn't arise to what's considered reasonable suspicion. At least that's what the expert in this article said. And I don't want to hear the BS that he was suspicious because he was in a high crime neighborhood. Okay, that implies a few things here. First, that certain behaviors are okay in the low crime neighborhoods and certain behaviors are not okay in high crime neighborhoods. That implies that some things you do are okay when you're rich, but not when you're poor or living in like a low income neighborhood. I don't buy that. It implies that simply being alive in a specific location somehow makes you more likely a criminal. And while it's statistically true, higher crime means more people are more likely to commit crime, we have to judge people on an individual and specific basis To say that somebody is more likely to commit a crime because they are in a higher crime neighborhood is a bigoted approach that strips people of their individuality. And if the police treated high crime neighborhoods like this, which this wasn't, by the way, Elijah McClain would still be alive and many other people would never come in contact with police. I think it's important to talk about the officers here because you can't trust them when they royally fucked up. You really can't. And I think this article is a prime example of that. This doesn't specifically apply to police officers, but it does turn out to be especially true when they've outright killed somebody. You know, how many times have you heard, a police officer say, "Oh, he was coming right at me," or "he was reaching," or "he had a deadly weapon," or the classic, "I feared for my life," when they kill somebody. And you're left wondering how the fuck anything they said was true after you watch a video. And that's what happened here. At the incident, police officers said that there was a violent and relentless struggle between Elijah and the officers. And after watching the video, I'm like, how? Like, how? What the hell? Dude, Elijah was almost crying. He was begging the police officers to leave him alone. The only violent part of this video was the part where they put their knee on his neck and cut off the blood to his brain and later sedated him where he died at the hospital. And I think that's something else that we need to talk about here. The paramedics, they grossly overestimated his weight and ended up sedating him more than they should have. And that's partially what caused his death. I think there needs to be some sort of liability on the paramedics as well as the police officers. But I don't know, man. Like, when you're in the hands of medical professionals, you think that you're being taken care of. But in this case, it ended up costing Elijah his life. It just doesn't sit well with me. We need police reform. And we need it immediately, before any more of our innocent brothers and sisters fall victim to needless police brutality. What does that mean? People say police reform, and it means a lot of things. From reading this story, here's a few that come to my mind. First, I think there needs to be accountability for officers who commit illegal stops, like what just happened. Officers have the power to take away people's lives and often get away with it. I don't think it's too much to ask that somebody with that much power suffer tangible consequences when they illegally stop somebody and put their lives at risk. We also need officers to learn de-escalation tactics so they aren't quick to apprehend somebody and turn what should be nothing into somebody's arrest or death. I think teaching police officers de-escalation tactics can actually prevent a lot of these things from happening, because then people won't necessarily come in contact with the police in a hostile way. We also need to end the war on drugs and treat addiction as an affliction instead of a crime. And I'll go into that in a little bit, but to take a quote from Tupac, he says that they have a war on drugs so that the police can bother him. And that's true. Because of the war on drugs, police can stop you because they think you're dealing drugs, even though you're not. They can search your car and search you in places they wouldn't otherwise because they're looking for specific drugs that you may or may not have. And on some occasions, they have actually planted drugs on a person's body, and there has been very little repercussion for officers who have done that because they've managed to get away with it. I want to pivot to ending the war on drugs and how it can be done. This isn't politically convenient. Yeah, it's not politically convenient, but I'm hoping to make it a little more palatable by talking about it. So I'm in favor of legalizing and regulating drugs. I don't think that drugs or their effects on people are inherently bad. Even though it's a lesser degree, we eat and drink things all the time that have similar effects to our bodies that drugs do. Illegal drugs, I mean. Coffee gives us caffeine. Food releases good hormones, good feeling hormones. You feel good after eating food. And sugar has a cocaine-like effect, and alcohol does so much to our mental state. The worst part about drugs is that the physical effects that unsafe drugs have and the addiction part that comes with it. That's the worst part about it. People want the high that these drugs give them, and they're going to get it one way or another. why not give it to them in a safe and accessible way for people to get high? The same way that we give people, who want to get drunk, an accessible ways to alcohol, instead of what happened in Prohibition, where, they would get their alcohol from the streets and they would get sick and all sorts of BS would happen. We can all agree now, in retrospect, that alcohol is safer now because it's been legalized and regulated. Why don't we just do the same thing with drugs? Why don't we just create safer versions of the same drugs? And that way, if they get addicted, they're not being apprehended by the police. If they, if they're drug users, or if they're carrying around drugs, they're not apprehended by the police. They can actually seek the treatment that they need to fix their addictions. I just want to say one more time, Elijah McClain, I'm sorry that this happened. And, rest in peace, buddy. Hope your family's well. Thank you so much for listening to this video. Please hit the like if you like, dislike if you dislike, and hit subscribe if you would be so inclined to. Thank you so much, and let's keep fighting.